All right. So I started training online. So look at it at your own time. Okay. Yeah, can you see me, please? Good afternoon, and well, welcome to today's continuation class. So last week we looked at a number of things. Now we looked at features, we looked at scenarios, and we're attempting to look at stories. So that feature was a functionality, that's a piece of functionality that is independent of the whole system, but that it does just one thing in the whole solution or products you're about churning out. And we saw that scenario is a way or some kind of ways the users or the personnel is going to or might use the developed system or product. However, we said that scenarios are more general, and of course, the users can relate properly to scenarios. Yeah, please, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Let me know. So while I continue. So scenarios are more general, right? And it is, all right, thank you. All right, thank you. However, stories are more specific, right? From either the user's point of view or from the solution developer's point of view. So we say scenarios are high-level stories of system use. That means the way the users might want to use the system. So they should describe a sequence of interaction with the system, but should not include details of these interactions. So it will just say, okay, I want to be able to do this, and that's simple enough. That's a story. That is a scenario. I want to be able to create other users. That is a scenario. However, stories in itself, user stories are finer grained narrative. Send me Emmanuel. Yes, please. Yeah, who raised his hand? Timmy. Person has dropped his hand again. Hello? Hello? I think there's nobody raising, but I saw somebody raising as like this. Okay, let's continue. So user stories are final grain narratives that set out in a more detailed and structured way a single thing that the user wants from a software or a software system. Now, on the contrary, scenarios are more general. I want to be able to create new users. It can be in different steps. However, user stories is pinpointing, and also it is a single thing that the user wants from a software system. As an author, like of course, we looked at this last week. As an author, I need a way to organize the book that I'm writing into chapters and sections. Now, the story reflects what has become the standard format of a user story. Now, as a rule, I want or need to do something. That is a syntax. Now, as a teacher, that's the rule. I want to tell all members of my group, that's tell all members of the group, now to do something. What do you want to do when new information is available? Now, a variant of this standard format adds a justification for the action. Why do you want to achieve that? Why do you want to tell people in your group when new information is available? Can they check by themselves? Now, the syntax is, as a rule, I want or need to do something so that you give the reason. So as a teacher, I need to be able to report who is attending a class trip so that the school maintains the required health and safety record, right? That's important to note. So sometimes what your story is needs to give reasons for demanding that kind of functionality or that kind of feature from the developer. So how do you plan user stories? Now, an important use of user story is in planning. So many users of Scrum method represent the product backlog as a set of user stories. So that means you could maybe get your product backlog list or product backlog item from the user stories so that you could look at that during a sprint. Now, if the user story is too complex, then you could break them into bits in such a way that it becomes the aim or the objective of each of the for each sprint that you have. So you could come up with a solution per time, right? So user stories should focus on a clearly defined system feature or aspect of a feature that can be implemented within a single sprint. Because we looked at what sprints are, what a sprint is, then we look at the duration of the sprint and those involved in the sprint. Now, if the story is about a more complex feature that might take several sprints to implement, then it is called an epic. I'm sure some of you watch African Magic Epic. They tell plenty stories. So they just sing one, sing 10, sing 20, and there have a lot of stories to tell. So once the story is too long, then it becomes African Magic Epic. Well, that's just by the way. Yeah, as a system manager, I need a way to back up the system and restore either individual application files, directories, or the whole system. Now, there is a lot of functionalities associated with this user story. For implementation, it should be broken down into simpler stories, with each story focusing on a single aspect of the backup system. Story development. Now, you can develop user stories by redefining or refining scenarios. You know, scenarios are very general. The person can say, I want to, just like a layman example, I want to be able to jump from a moving plane, or that's what he wants. But what are the steps involved in jumping out of a moving plane? Assuming that you're a paratrooper, right? So then stories will now refine this into executable steps. For instance, you would have trained to be a paratrooper, or you would have developed your arm muscles to the extent that is able to control the movement of the parachutes while you are floating, right? Then you should be able to breathe some thousands of feet above sea level. So these are the trainings that you need to go. So breaking scenarios into stories helps you identify the steps that are involved in solving the problem or coming up with what's the name? Coming up with features that are more critical than others. So 3 user scenarios can be identified from the following fragments of 3 user stories can be identified from the following fragments of Emma's scenario. From home, she logs on to the iLearn system using a Google account credentials. Emma has 2 iLearn accounts. The one is a teacher's account and the other a parent account associated with the local primary school. Now the system recognizes that she is a multiple account owner and asks her to select the account to be used. Now she chooses the teacher's account and the system generates a personal welcome screen that as a user, no, as a teacher, sorry. Now, as well as selected applications, this also shows management apps that helps teachers create and manage students group. So these are user stories from Emma's scenario can be represented. So as a teacher, she wants to be able to log into her iLearn account from home using her Google credentials so that she doesn't have to remember another login ID and password. The second story, as a teacher, she wants to access the app that she uses for class management and administration. Then also as a teacher and parent, she wants to be able to select the appropriate iLearn account so that she does not have to have separate credentials for each account. So user stories describing the group feature. So these ones are further broken down into more detailed users stories so that at least each of those features can be run through in a sprint. So let's compare stories and scenarios. As you can express all the functionality described in a scenario as user stories, do you really need scenarios then? Right? So when you could get straight down to stories, why do you first of all want to generalize first before you start fine-tuning? Now, scenarios are more natural and helpful for the following reasons. So we want to see the reason why we should not jettison the scenario, especially when you are working with users directly, or even when you are trying to generate scenarios as a programmer yourself, right? So scenarios read more naturally because they describe what a user of a system is actually doing with that system. Now, people often find it easy to relate to the specific information rather than the statements of wants or needs set out in a set of user stories. Now, if you are interviewing real users or are checking a scenario with real users, they don't talk in the stylized way that is used in the user stories. That means they don't talk in such syntax that we looked at earlier, where they say, I want to be able to do this because of this. They may not be able to think in that way. And if you want to force them to think in that way, they may not be able to express themselves well in semantics and in syntax. Yes, so people relate better to more natural narratives in scenarios. So it is more natural. Just be talking, I'll be jotting important points. Imagine if I decide to start using stories in this case. So I just say, okay, stories and scenarios are this, full stop. Let's go to maybe software architecture. Now, you may not get or understand the details of what it entails in what I really want to pass across. So scenarios often provide more context. There's information about what the user is trying to do and their normal way of working. You can do this in user stories, but it means that they are no longer simple statements about the use of the system features. That means you are making it, you are trying to make it more exact when you are using stories. But once you are using scenario, the individual can tell you a lot of things about how he has been working, what he feels is not working, and what he feels he should improve on. So as a programmer or as a developer, you could now, okay, this is what this person is facing. This is the problem space the person has told me, and this is a solution I intend to provide. So without a user scenario, you are shortchanging yourself as a programmer, and your requirement engineering will be tougher because you could assume that you have gotten what this individual needs, but you go and bring a different product, diverse or divergent from what this person really needs. So it's better you listen carefully as much as possible to the user requirement. You look at the person's educational level, you look at the person's maybe how use is this person to technology. For instance, I went to a shop recently. Now they always use it's a large shop, anyways, you could pass it for a supermarket, but they didn't have any management system, right? So I just got there. Next thing I saw networkings, I saw systems, and you know, the elderly fellow was just on our glasses and trying to maybe enter the system and trying to select the product I came to buy. So such person, I don't think you should make things complex for her. Of course, she knows the nitty-gritty of her business, right? So all she needed is tools to help her in accountability, and so that our shopkeepers won't tamper or steal her stuff. At least she just needed that functionality. Now, as a programmer, you need to understand that this person does not need any technical jargons, right? She just needed maybe pick and drops to be able to solve our problems. But of course, I wasn't able to pick into the system, but I know she was having trouble using that system, because after some time, I just go, leave this thing, let me use calculator to calculate it. She prefer a manual system because that system developed has failed the tests of a layman user. So as developers, we should be able to not just being able to develop very complex systems, right? We should be able to also look at from the prism of the person who is going to use that system, right? We should not assume that the person has the same requisite knowledge as us, right? So feature identification. So we said that feature a particular function or that does a particular function in a functionality or in a system, and should not be ambiguous. So how do we identify features? We could identify features in different ways. We could look at the user stories. We could also look at the scenario created by the users. So your aim in the initial stage of product design should be to create a list of features that defines your product, right? What is your system or your product aiming to achieve? Now, a feature is a way of allowing users to access and use your product's functionality, so that the feature list defines the overall functionality of the system. So you could have like an eagle eye of each of the modules that you need to create to complete the system. So it's like a form of abstraction into segments or into modules that you will use in accompanying or achieving the whole system functionality. So features should be independent, it should be coherent, and also it should be relevant. So feature independence, features should not depend on how other system features are implemented, and should not be affected by the order of activation of other features. So if you want to print, right, it should just be print and nothing more. It should not be dependent on anything. For instance, you can print a blank page. So it should not be dependent that you have to type first before you print. But of course, you still have to, in a way, launch an application before you print. All right, so coherence, features should be linked to a single item of functionality. They should not do more than one thing, and they should never have side effects. Relevance, features should reflect the way that users normally carry out some tasks. They should not provide obscure functionality that is hardly ever required. Now, if you put things that the user does not really need underneath, maybe it performs some other functions when the user clicks on a particular image to perform a feature function. If that is done, as we see just in a movement, you are increasing the complexity of that system, right? And it will also constitute probably a form of redundancy. Not only that, it could be a source to introduce bugs into the system. So what are the knowledge required for feature design? You should know the user that you're developing it for. You should understand the product. You should understand the domain. And also you should know the technology that is being used in that domain. So this is a feature design diagram showing us what is required in feature design. So what are the trade-offs in feature selections? Of course, we have simplicity and functionality, familiarity and novelty, automation and control. Now, simplicity and functionality, you need to find the balance between providing a simple, easy to use system and including enough functionality to attract users with a variety of needs. Now, some people may have needs that is similar, right? But by the click of a button, you may be able to solve the whole chain of features that they have raised in their stories or in their scenario. However, you should be careful in doing this because what this individual needs, right? If you want to adopt that same system to customize for another person, that may run foul of the need of the other individual that you are customizing the product for. Now, familiarity and novelty. Users prefer that new software should support the familiar everyday tasks that are part of their work or part of their life. Now, to encourage them to adopt your system, you need to find a balance between familiar features and new features that convince users that your products can do more than its competitors. Now, for instance, I was checking out WhatsApp just over the night, midnight, of course, and I tried to update or kind of upgrade what I was using. Now, in the first instance, what made me even subscribe to the use of WhatsApp is that it are the functions that look like a simple call. Like there's a like an icon that you could just make calls. There's an icon showing that this is where you have text messages. There's an icon showing that, okay, you could create a group here. So for me, that is simple to use. Now, something is called a social app. I don't want to start reading textbooks to be able to use it. There are some apps that I don't use, not because I do not have requisite knowledge to use them, but because I just don't feel comfortable with the interfaces, right? I don't understand how you use them. You have too much rules and regulations. You have limitations to what you can do. Now, I think I did an update on my WhatsApp maybe last year. Now I found out that to update your, I think your status, maybe if you have to type, the words are quite bigger, like will fill up the screen and you can see the things you are reading without the use of glasses or a pair of glasses. Now, when I updated it, I found that it was very little. The space it occupied was very little. I got pissed off and I just stopped the use of that for some time. Now, suddenly, I found out that they had corrected it and the stuff became big. So I could read those things without the use of my glasses. Just yesterday, when I tried to update again, those things have returned to that little stuff. And obviously, there's a need for me to stop because I can't continually strain my eyes because I want to use something that is just for social. So what you're going to develop should be familiar to the user in such a way that the user can easily relate, right? And it should not fall short of what the user already knows or is used to, right? For instance, you are telling me to start coding before I can use a common WhatsApp or Facebook. No, I don't have such time for now. If it's something more important, then we could look at that. But it's not so important, so I don't need to waste so much of my time. So automation and control. Some user likes automation, that's everything done automatically, whereas where the software does things for them, other prefers to have control. Now you have to think carefully about what can be automated, how it is automated, and how users can configure the automation so that the system can be tailored to their preference. So these are the things you need to look at. So factors in feature set design. So you have control, simplicity, functionality, familiarity, novelty, and automation. So what is a feature creep? Now, feature creeps occur when new features are added in response to users' requests without considering whether or not these features are generally useful or whether they can be implemented in some ways. So I think WhatsApp has committed a blunder called feature creep by reducing their status updates, fonts, and appearance. Anyways, I don't know if that is applicable to others too. But I think that is what I find irritating. So too many features make products hard to use and understand. Now, there are three reasons why feature creep occurs. The first one is that product managers are reluctant to say no when users ask for specific features, right? Now, this is one of the major disadvantages of the agile method, right? Where you have to release maybe increments. It's not a major disadvantage, but it's at least you could look at it that, okay, if you continue to release increments for the users, it gets to a point where, you know, the things just become cumbersome. So developers try to match features in competing products. So if you want to maybe do some kind of shortcuts, like, okay, this is similar, this function is similar, then you want to match them together, right? That could lead to feature creep. Now, the product includes features to support both inexperienced and experienced users. You see, just as I was saying for that woman in the shop, you want to create something, right, that a professional will use, a semi-professional use, and a stack illiterate will use. Now you can't model up that. So in a way, you just find yourself selling products to users who don't even understand it, right? But or you could sell it to people who may appreciate it. So it's important you unbundle the personnel that are going to use those products, right? So that you don't assume that they are on the same level of knowledge. So these are, excuse me. So these are the questions you look at in avoiding feature creeps. Does this feature really add anything new to, or is simply an alternative way of doing something that is already supported? Now, can this feature be implemented by extending an existing feature rather than adding another feature to the system? Now, is this feature likely to be important to and used by most software users? Does this feature provide general functionality, or is it a very specific feature? So those are the questions you ask yourself in order for you to avoid creeps. Now, features can be identified directly from product vision, right? Or from scenarios. Of course, you could also get that from stories. You can highlight phrases in narrative description to identify features to be included in the software. Now, you should think about the feature needed to support users' action, identified by active verbs such as use and choose. An example is the island system vision, now which says that for teachers and educators who needs a way to help students use web-based learning resources and application, the island system is an open learning environment that allows the set of resources used by classes and students to be easily configured for these students and classes by teachers themselves. Unlike virtual learning environments, such as Moodle, the focus of iLearn is the learning process. The learning process is there rather than the administration and management of materials, assessment, and coursework. Our product enables teachers to create subjects and each specific environment for their students using any web-based resources, such as videos, simulators, and written materials that are appropriate. Now, this is a statement, a product vision statement written for iLearn. No, so you could develop features from this. So how do you now develop features from the product vision? A feature that allows users to access and use existing web-based resources. The features that allow the system to exist in multiple different instantiations. A feature that allows users configuration of the system to create a specific instantiations. Sorry. So let's look at the Jack scenario with highlighted phrases. So Jack is a primary school teacher in Unapoli. Of course, we have looked at that. Teaching primary 6 pupils. He has decided that a class project should be focused around fishing industry in the area, looking at the history, development, and economic impact of fishing. Now, as part of this, students are asked to gather and share reminiscences from relatives, use newspaper archives, and collect old photographs related to fishing and fishing communities in the area. Students use Island Wiki to gather together fishing stories and Scrum and a history archive to access newspaper archives and photographs. However, Jack also needs a photo sharing site, as he wants pupils to take and comment on each other's photos and to upload scans of old photographs that they may have in their families. Now, he also needs to be able to moderate posts with photos before they are shared. Now, because preteen children can't understand copyright and privacy issues. Now, Jack sends an email to a primary school teachers group, which he is a member of, to see if anyone can recommend an appropriate system. 2 teachers replied, and both suggested that he uses Kid Takes Pics, a photo sharing site that allows teachers to check and moderate content. As Kid Take Pics is not integrated with Island authentication service, he sets up a teacher and a class account with Kid Take Pics. Now, he uses the Island setup service to add Kid Take Pics to the service seen by the students in the class, so that when they log in, they can immediately use the system to upload photos from their phones and class computer. So this is Jack's scenario of what he wants the system to be able to do. Now, what are the features that we can derive from this? The first one is that a wiki group for writing. It needs to access the Scrum History Archive. This is the shared national resources that provide a shared national resource that provide access to historical newspaper and magazines articles for schools and universities. Now, features to set up and to access an email group, a feature to also integrate an application that is not part of the original Island, which is Kid Takes Pics, with the Island Authentication Service, right? So these are the features that we could come up with from the from Jack's scenario. So what are the feature lists? Now, the output of the feature identification process should be a list of features that you use for designing and implementing your products. Now, there's no need to go into a lot of details about the features at this stage. You add details when you are implementing the features. Now, you can describe features using a standard input action output template by using structured narrative describe or description, or by a set of user story. Excuse me. So feature description using stories. So we have a description here. So as a system manager, I want to create and configure an Island environment by adding and removing services to or from the environment, so that I can create environments for specific purposes. As a system manager, I want to set up sub-environment that includes a subset of services that are included in another environment. As a system manager, I want to assign administrators to create environments. As a system manager, I want to limit the right of environment administrators so that they cannot accidentally or deliberately disrupt the operation of key services. As a teacher, I want to be able to add services that are not integrated within the Island authentication system. Constraints. the use of some tools may be limited for license reasons. So there may be a need to access license management tools during configuration. And comments based on Ella's and Jack's scenario. So feature description using stories of this form, right? Yeah, I'm aware that I've been kicked out. That's network trouble. Yeah, I hope you can hear me, please. Can you see hear me, please? Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry. I was kicked out of the meeting. Yeah. Who are those who were shouting that MTN is the father of a network? MTN just disappeared now. And Airtel has been giving me trouble since 3 weeks ago. Oh boy. Okay. Yeah, can you see still my screen, please? Yeah, I hope you can see hear me now. All right, thank you, Mr. Lanite. Features. Okay. Share. All right. Sorry for that disruption. So going forward. Yeah, so innovation and feature identification. Now, scenarios and user stories should always be your starting point for identifying product features. Scenarios tells you how user works, or how user work at the moment. They don't show how they might change their way of working. Now, if they had the right software to support them. Now, stories and scenarios are tools for thinking, and they help you gain an understanding of how your software might be used. You can identify a feature set from stories and scenarios. Now, user research on its own really help you innovate and invent new ways of working. Why? Because you're already used to best practices. Now you need to understand that, okay, these people who are in the shoes, they know where it pinches. And those are the people who need solutions for that. For instance, you can't tell maybe a governor of a state that there's petrol scarcity. Or you can't tell Tinubu that there's no new Naira notes available, right? And you can't tell maybe the president of the country that there's no power supply. He doesn't understand any of that. So you're already used to everything being available as a programmer. So you don't understand why somebody cannot articulate his points clearly and sufficiently, right? So you should also think creatively about alternative or additional features that help users to work more efficiently or to do things differently. Oh. So sorry. I didn't know I was muted, though. Oh boy. So I was just reading out the key points. I hope you could look at that. Sorry about that. Yeah, I was asking, was there any question from what you have done this far before we move to the next chapter, please? Any question? Who is this Muyi writing his matric number again? Have we finished the class? And besides, I said you should write your full name. You are just writing Muyi. I'll soon delete you from the group and you're not able to join again. Do we have any question before we move to the next? All right. Okay, Iroayo Emmanuel. Okay, please, you have the floor, please.
Okay, yeah. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, please.
My question is, why would you call something a feature creep if all users cannot at the same time accept a feature? For example, you mentioned about WhatsApp and the small font. Some users actually prefer that small font. So why would you call it a feature creep?
All right, thank you. Now, what I was referring to is this. Once you have a product that is customized to a particular user, it's not so nice for you to have all features that you feel every other person will like installed or incorporated into his own product. While I understand that WhatsApp is for a large group of people, right? But I am personalizing it now as, okay, I installed it on my phone. Now, the previous ones was better for me. For some people, as you have opined, they are okay with the small fonts. What about those of us who are four-eyed? So if that product is to be developed for me, they should have created a point where I could select some of the features I feel is okay for me, not slamming it on everybody. Well, that's why I feel that it's maybe a creep, but no, it may not be a creep for other people, but for me, I feel it's a feature creep. So I'm personalizing the stuff. I hope I've been able to respond appropriately. Any other question, suggestion? Yeah, I learned fuel prices are now quite high. Nigeria will be great. Yeah, so before we go on, let's have our announcement. As you are aware, next week is okay, Mr. Ruayo. Okay, thank you. I just saw your message. It is 300 per liter. Oh, that's cheap. We bought for 450. Yes, no, on Thursday. And I learned in Ekiti State is 800. Yeah, so we are burning a lot. Okay, next week, it's orientation week for freshers. When I mean freshers, postgraduate freshers. So to that effect, we may not have lectures. Now, it depends on what the coordinator says. Excuse me. So the coordinator may, may decide otherwise, that the orientation may not hold. So to that effect, we'll be having our first test next week. If orientation holds, if orientation does not hold, sorry. But if it holds, then I will not have any class. I will not have any tests. So the next time we're going to meet we're going to be having our first test. Yeah, Mr. Biodun Oloyede, say you bought for 400 in Benin as well on Thursday. Oh, that was interesting. And who is that fellow working in Airtel that said you should check my number? The stuff will just go and come back. I'm supposed to use my Airtel router for this class. It's not even working. I had to use my MTN. MTN just appeared again, and the whole thing looks terrible. So you guys should find a way to sort that out. Or those of you working in what's the name, MTN, you should get me a 5G. Those working in Airtel, get a 5G and you load it up. So that I will not have problem with all these people and their trouble. All right, so let's continue. Software architecture. Now, for any product to be successfully delivered, construed, sorry, let me see, there's a message here, something. Please get MAFAP 5G. Which one is MAFAP 5G again? Well, I'm not aware of that. Cefinat. What's the jurisdiction? Oh, it's a 0801 network for. I'm actually using Airtel and it is smooth. Oh, for now 15 sites up. Oh, okay. Yeah, but look at the stuff is on now and it's just blinking. The 5G is not showing. The 4G is not showing. And Airtel seems now expire. Huh? Really? That's strange. Well, I'm not aware of that anyways. But this thing is on. It's showing all those blinking, all those blue stuff. Network is blinking. Then the one is not blinking. LAN is not blinking. The 4G is not also blinking. So I try to connect, just connect and go off again. So that's the problem I'm having. So, all right, so let's continue. Now, so for any product to be delivered, there must be a framework to achieve that. Now, of course, you are sure of, you're also aware of engineers, especially those architects and builders. They have what is called, what they call that thing? They have this lines that they draw on papers. Is it plans? So they have plans that they draw before they are before they start their job, as it were. So also is it for software developers. We should have in our mind that we have different features of a system interacting. Now, how do they interact? What are the things we're supposed to consider before looking at, before putting all of them together? For instance, there are some places in Lagos that are swampy, right? You cannot compare that to places that are rocky or that they are firm. So for those places that are very muddy or watery, you have to sand fill for a long period of time just to achieve maybe a little bit above sea level or something compact enough for you to build on. Now, the architectural preparation that you will give in those areas or region is going to be different from what you have in some other places. For instance, I was traveling to the Delta States or Port Harcourt one time, and I saw the way they were constructing their own road. It's quite different. You see, they will have to dig so deep when they get to a level, you see water gushing out from the ground, just a little surface. Then they will pile up rocks or gravels or something just to make it solid. Then that's very big rocks. Then they will pour gravels to fill in the spaces in between the rock. Then they will put sand, they will compact it. That's just their own preparation, as against in North, especially the Zaria Kano Road, where everything is more like mud, real mud, solid. They just start excavating, they will compact the soil, they put the first layer of what's the name, bitumen, then they just start their work. So different preparation is expected for different software products that you want to churn out or that you want to give to users. Now, what are the things you're going to consider to determine the kind of architectural framework that you're going to include in your product? So that's what we want to look at in this class, as it were. So to create a reliable, secure, and efficient product, you need to pay attention to architectural design, which includes its overall organization, how the software is decomposed into components, the server organization, the technology that you use to build the software, that's the architecture of the software product affects the performance, usability, security, reliability, and maintainability of the system, right? So these are the things you need to consider first before you come up with an architectural framework or an architectural design. Of course, you first of all come up with something called a conceptual framework that you look at the overall, as in how you can relate with the product physically. Then, of course, you now look at the conceptual framework and the architectural framework. So it's the architectural framework that will look at the nitty-gritty of the product you want to develop and their interaction using standard languages. Now, there are many different interpretations of the term software architecture. Some focus on architecture as a noun, that's the structure of a system, and others consider architecture to be a verb, the process of defining these structures. Now, the IEEE definition of software architecture is that is a fundamental organization of a software system embodied in its components, their relationship to each other, and to the environment and the principles guiding its design and evolution. Now, software architecture and components. Now, a component is an element that implements a coherent set of functionalities or features. Now, software components can be considered as a collection of one or more services that may be used by other components. Now, when designing software architecture, you don't have to decide an architectural element or component is to how it's to be implemented. Rather, you design the component interface and leave the implementation of that interface to a later stage of the development process that you look at how they interact, you look at the security implication, you look at number of users, you look at the kind of database you will deploy, and a host of other things. Now, here you have components, and the service accessed directly by other components. So these are components accessing services directly. These are services accessed through APIs, and also accessing different services at different intervals. So access to service provided by software components. Now let's move on. Why is architectural design so important in software product development? So architecture is important because the architecture of a system has a fundamental influence on the non-functional system properties. Of course, shortly we are going to be looking at the non-functional system properties. Oftentimes in research, we call it non-functional requirements. Though non-functional, but they are important to the overall performance and the work or the success of the product in the marketplace. So architectural design involves understanding the issues that affect the architecture of your product and creating an architectural description that shows the critical components and their relationship. It is also important that you minimize complexity, which is one of the goals for architectural designers, because the more complex your system is, the more likely it is for users to just get pissed off by it. So the more complex the system is, the more difficult and expensive it is to understand and change. Programmers are more likely to make mistakes and introduce bugs and security vulnerabilities when they are modifying or extending a complex system. So for those of you who like a very complex design, there's a likelihood that you are creating a back door for hackers to get into your system. Also, as important as you may want to also say that those complex introduction are for maybe to create redundancy, to allow your system to continue to function if there is a failure. Now, how do you secure those redundant additions that you have is also very important for us. So non-functional system qualities attributes are as follows: responsiveness, reliability, availability, security, usability, maintainability, and resilience. Does the system return, that's for responsiveness, does the system return results to users in a reasonable time? Reliability, does the system feature behave as expected by both developers and users? Availability, can the system deliver its services when requested by users? Security, does the system protect itself and users' data from unauthorized attack and intrusion? Usability, can system user access the features that they need and use them quickly and without errors? Maintainability, can the system be readily updated and new features added without undue costs? Resilience, now can the system continue to deliver user services in event of partial failure or external attack? Now here is where the concept of adding redundant maybe nodes or redundant sensors is important, so that if there's a failure on one route, there could be an ongoing work, or you could continue your work with the other route. Excuse me. So we want to look at the influence of architecture design on overall system security. And this will lead us to considering what types of architecture can be adopted in terms of security measure. So a centralized security architecture. Now, in this game, the Star Wars Prequel Rogue One. Now, the Evil Empire have stored the plan for all of their equipment in a single, highly secure, well-guarded remote location. This is called a centralized system architecture. But the question is centralized system architecture so good, at least for systems or for other things? Now, it is based on the principle that if you maintain all of your information in one place, then you can apply lots of resources to protect that information and ensure that intruders can't get hold of it. Now, for those of you who work on security, and for those who do a number of research in that area, we have argued that is putting so much security on a particular place, does it make that place secure? That's a question we have always asked. People will say, okay, let's employ different security securing mechanisms. The question is that if you have all your important information in one place and you deploy a number of security architecture, a number of maybe algorithms to protect that system, does it make it safe? Now, of course, one of the things we always ask is that having a number, maybe so many padlocks or locks and keys on a particular door that houses important things, does it make that place totally safe? Now, these are questions that we need to ask when we are developing security architecture for the products we want to deliver. Now, it is based on the principle that if you maintain all of your information in one place, then you can apply lots of resources to protect that information. and ensure that intruders can't get hold of it. Unfortunately, as for the empire, in the example that we have above, the rebel managed to breach their security. They stole the plans for the Death Star, an event which underpins the whole Star Wars saga. In trying to stop them, the Empire destroyed their entire archive of system documentation with who knows what resultant costs to that kind of action. So instead of, okay, you can't get anything. So for you not to get anything, we also burn down all that we have in that location so that you don't have advantage over us. Now, had the empire chosen a distributed security architecture as against centralized, with different parts of the Death Star plan stored in different locations, then stealing the plan would have been more difficult. The rebel would have had to breach securities in all locations to steal the complete Death Star blueprints, which in essence may not be so possible. Yes, you know, I was in the infantry for over 17 years. So I understand some of these security protocols. Now, some of you don't even believe in the security ableness of our security forces. And you don't even believe we have some warheads or some fighting equipment. But you'll be surprised that once there are breaches or in maybe our security, you understand how much we can rule out in just a bit, right? Now, some of the locations where some of these tanks and warheads are stored, they are dispersed all over the country. But of course, we cannot move all those artilleries or warheads to the northeast because that's where we have the crust of the problem now. We cannot move all of them there because if the enemy notices that we're moving all our artilleries up north, then they start to attack the southwest or some other region. And that's a mistake that they are making. And I'm sure you are aware that they have started laying siege on the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway. They are somewhere along Edo, Benin, Auchi, Sapele axis. So they are caving in. They are coming in after being displaced from the northeast. However, for our security architecture, which is decentralized, highly decentralized, right, we're able to still protect the country and still hold the country safe to a certain level. As much as the insecurity is, the country is still relatively safe, right? Some of you in Lagos can still return home as late as 12. Some places, they cannot even drive once it's 6 p.m., right? Especially some places in the northeast. So it is important that you look at the design of your architectural framework or design before you proceed and what is important to you. The participant, okay, all right. So centralized security architecture. The benefit of centralized security architecture are that it is easier to design. You see, as bad as centralized security is, it has its own merits, as it were. Now, it is easier to design and build protection around it, and that the protected information can be easily and more efficiently assessed. For instance, if you need maybe a Tacoma jet now, I'm sure you're aware of the treaty signed with the US that the Tacoma jet will not move out of a jurisdiction that's the northeast. So if there's any uprising in Lagos or Southwest, the Tacoma jet cannot be redeployed from that place to Lagos. Why? Because the kind of security architecture given as a precursor to the sale of Tacoma jets to Nigeria is that it must be centrally located in a region. Now, is that the best we could achieve in our deals? Of course, they will look at it. Is it because of human rights abuses? Of course, we told them we wanted you to prosecute the war against Boko Haram. Now, if you deploy it to the Southwest, do we have Boko Harams in the Southwest? Of course, some of them are already coasting home in the forest. That gives us more reasons why we could also renegotiate the kind of security architectures that we have there. So, however, if your security is breached, you lose everything. So if there's any of these criminals who decide to go on rampage using air power and decides to visit our hangars, maybe in the Northeast, and blow up all those Takuma jets, then we have lost several billions in hardwares. So if you distribute information, it takes longer to access. So as good as distributive architecture is, it also has its own demerits. So it takes longer for you to access information from the stored location, and it costs more to protect because you have to deploy security in each of those regions that to protect the piece of information that you have there. In this, so if security is breached in one location, you only lose the information that you have stored in there, or you don't lose everything completely. So let's look at from the point of maintainability and performance. Now, the first figure in the next slide shows a system with two components, right? So this is a component. You have the user interface, you have the component 1, component 2, and shared database, right? That shares a common database. Assume C1 runs slowly because it has to recognize the information in the database before using it. Now, the only way to make C1 faster might be to change the database. This means that C2 also has to be changed, which may potentially affect its response time. In the second figure, a different architecture is used where each component has its own copy of the part of the database it needs here. So you have the C2, that's the user interface, the component 1, component 2, it has its own database, and you have the C3 for reconciliation, right? So if one component needs to change the database organization, this does not affect the other component. So the other component keeps working while the other one is being repaired. However, a multi-database architecture may run more slowly and cost more to implement and change. So a multi-database architecture needs a mechanism as a component C3 to ensure that the database shared by C1 and C2 is kept consistent when it is changed. Of course, I'm sure you are doing something on database management. You would have come across problems associated with database. You have a concurrency control, you have deadlock situations, then you have when you have information still running and the other maybe component has updated the system. So when this one returns the information to the database, inconsistency of data. So there are a lot of problems when using multi-database approach as an architectural framework. Right, so issues that influence architectural decisions are: 1, the non-functional product characteristics, which we have looked at, the software compatibility, numbers of users, software reuse, and product lifetime. So let's look at them one after the other. The non-product characteristics. Non-functional product characteristics such as security and performance affects all users. So if you get this wrong, your product is unlikely to be a commercial success. Unfortunately, some characteristics are opposing, so you can only optimize the most important. Now, you cannot say one approach is the best without looking at other circumstances, yes, before deploying a particular architecture. For instance, as we looked at in that war game, if they had maybe if they have a decentralized system where they have a bit of their plans stored somewhere, what happens if we have nations just maybe gathering or ganging up against them? And let's say they have 5 locations, and each of those countries invade those 5 locations at the same time. It will still be as if they have stored their plans in one location because they will be overrun at the same time, and the plans can be got in pieces. And of course, for them to respond to bomb the whole area where they have centralized information, that wouldn't have been possible, because they will first of all start going from place to place. Before they get to the fifth place, maybe they would have escaped with some of their plans. So you weigh the options very critically. And what are you going to be looking at? Now, on Thursday, I was looking at complexity of algorithms with some students. And we stated that once you are developing an algorithm and you need to implement it, we test for its complexity, a priori or a priori methods. Some of them are mathematical and some empirical. Now, in calculating those complexity, we have some that must be subjected to the types of data that you want to impute into the algorithm. Now, we took cognizance of what was the name? An algorithm that compares between two features or two inputs. We wanted to check that when can we get an even number in an arrangement, a serial arrangement of elements of the same size. So we have three sets of inputs, right? We had one that the first even number appeared at the last. The second one, we have the input having the even number at the beginning. And we have one that the even number was appearing at the middle. So we looked at the type of data, though they have the same number of elements, 20 each. But when we supply the input, we now looked at the number of comparisons before you get the answer. For the first one, we have 20 elements. So there must be at least 21 comparisons before that algorithm we get the best, we get the first even number. To that extent, we say that algorithm is a worst case scenario. However, the first one just does one comparison because the element is 20, but the first even number that we're looking for is just at the beginning. So we say that kind of algorithm is a best case scenario. Then the other one is average case because the element we're looking for is in the middle. However, in developing an algorithm, we concluded that we need to know the modulus, that means the weight of the data, the number of elements in the data, then the type of the data you want to supply, and also the data structure of the data you want to input. Now, having considered the data aspect, we also looked at a possibility of looking at the type of algorithm or its implementation. Some algorithms are just series algorithm, just step by step. Some are iterative, right? So you do this. Some are recurrent, like where you have what's the name, function calling functions. So you have direct call. In that you have direct call, you have indirect call. So in trying to look at the complexity of this algorithm, it is different. So the complexity using BIGO, you have one. There's a simple statement having a complexity of 1. Now, some are of the BIGO of n, some are of logarithm, some are cubic, right? Some are linear, some are exponential. So it depends on the type of algorithm you want to implement. It depends on the the users. It depends on the input that you want to use before you determine the kind of security that you want to deploy in any software product that you want to churn out to the people. Now, product life. If you anticipate a long product lifetime, you will need to create regular product revision. You therefore need an architecture that is evolvable so that it can be adapted to accommodate new features and new technology. Now, I'm sure some of you joined Facebook as far back as 2008. Of course, that's when I joined. So, you see, before I got to it, I didn't even understand what I was doing. I just noticed that you just be seeing your friends flying around. Okay, you send friend requests. Now, I got to a point that you don't see your friends again. You start sending friend requests to very terrible strangers you don't even know, just because you feel that, oh, you went to the same school, yeah, you went to the same university, but you don't know them as such. But it got to a point that you just had to delete some of them, that I don't really know this person. So why am I even friends with the person? Right? Now you see that Facebook has evolved. If some of you keep record or you have snapshots of the first Facebook, you know that things have really changed. Because one, technology has changed and other things have also evolved. And because Facebook envisioned that the product life would be very, very will be very long, lifetime will be very long. It designs architecture to be evolvable and also adaptable to new technology. So software reuse. Now you can save a lot of time and effort if you can reuse large components from other products or open source software. However, this constrain your architectural choice because you must fit your design around the software that is being reused. So you have to use the architectural design originally from that open source. So you are not at liberty to decide on what kind of architectural framework you want to deploy for your product. So number of users. Now, if you are developing consumer software delivered over the internet, the number of users can change very quickly. Facebook, for instance, now Meta, they say they have changed Facebook. Now, this can lead to serious performance degradation unless you design your architecture so that your system can be quickly scaled up or scaled down depending on the need or the access by these users. Then software compatibility. For products, it is important to maintain compatibility with other softwares so that users can adopt your products and use data prepared using a different system. This might limit architectural choice, such as the database software and software that you can use. I'm sure for those of you who did something on microprocessor and assembly language programming, you understand the importance of microprocessor architecture, that the words that you can use on a particular product or a particular MP, that's microprocessor, may not be acceptable on another microprocessor, even if they have the same generation. Like, for instance, when you have the Intel 885 and 886, they may not be able to run the same opcodes, right? Now, when you now come to the x86, right, they have different opcodes that may not be able to run on the Motorola 6800 or Motorola 68000 or Zilog 80. Then let's look at the trade-off that you need to take when you are doing maintainability and performance. So when you want to develop an architectural design, now system maintainability is an attribute that reflects how difficult and how expensive it is to make changes to a system after it has been released to customers. Now, you improve maintainability by building a system from small self-contained parts, each of which can be replaced or enhanced if changes are required. In architectural terms, this means that the system should be decomposed into fine-grained components, each of which does one thing and one thing only. However, it takes time for components to communicate with each other. Consequently, if many components are involved in implementing a product feature, then the software may become very slow. That's a trade-off. So in order to escape having a feature creep, you could also run into a system or into a situation where your system becomes slow. So that's a trade-off. So trade-off, security and usability. You can achieve security by designing the system protection as a series of layers, as shown in the figure that follows. Now, this is a figure, right, where you have IP authentication, application authentication, feature authentication, encryption, protected assets such as this. Now, what is the trade-off? An attacker has to penetrate all these layers before the system is compromised, right? Now, layers might include system authentication layer, a separate critical feature authentication layer, and encryption layer, and so on. Architecturally, you can implement each of these layers as separate components so that if one of the components is compromised by an attacker, then other layer remain intact. But this is not all. What about users who get pissed off by having to authenticate each of the layers, right? Now, when I was thinking maybe yesterday or so, now instead of this, why don't you just have employ people who could work in these different layers, except if it's just going to be one person who is going to be managing the system. So why can't one person, maybe different people, operate at different roles so that if need be, they will have to write for upgrades to the next role instead of them getting irritated by having to go from maybe one layer to the other. Now, for those of you who work at the banking, in the banking industry, you are aware that there's a limit to the types of accounts you could get access to. Well, I'm not sure, but I feel that's true. Now, a teller may not be able to access the like of Dangote's kind of accounts. Now, you may need authorization to be able to access that. Now, top management may not need such access, maybe such authentication. They would have been given separate authentication to get maybe to access different levels of accounts. So if you are working in the banking industry, could you give us an insight on that? Do we have different kind of account? Those people, market people, those of us who are lecturers, then those who work in Schlumberger, then those who steal money from government and keep it. Now, instance, we needed to get this new Naira notes. We don't see it. As a matter of fact, I saw the 1,000 Naira note on Thursday for the first time. I got to touch it for the first time on Thursday, and 500 Naira notes. I just got the 200 Naira note. I kept it so that I don't spend, though it has been spent anyways. But they still dispense the old notes. But some people were spending this bill at parties, and the public don't have it. How did they get it? What security did they break? Oh boy. Yes, I think I was logged out briefly. Yes, can you hear me? Oh, okay. Thank you. I see some response. All right. Thank you. Yeah, who works in the banking industry? Can they explain why we are not getting money? Is it because of security or what? So while we wait for the person, let's look at usability issues. Now, a layer approach to security affects the usability of the software. Users have to remember information like password that is needed to penetrate the security layer. The interaction with the system is inevitably slowed down by its security features. Many users find this irritating and often look for workarounds it so that they do not have to re-authenticate to access system features and data. All right. So to avoid this, you need an architecture that doesn't have too many security layers, that doesn't enforce unnecessary security, that provides helper components that reduces the load on the users, maybe remember password or something. That can also help. So let's look at the trade-off between availability and time to market. Now, availability is particularly important in enterprise products, such as products for the finance industry, where 24/7 operation is expected. The availability of a system is a measure of the amount of uptime of that system. So availability is normally expressed as a percentage of the time that a system is available to deliver user services or service. Architecturally, you achieve availability by having redundant components in the system. Excuse me. So once you have redundant components in the system, as we observed earlier, the systems become slow, kind of. Not only that, it could introduce a backdoor for hackers to get into your system. Now, to make use of redundancy, you include sensor components that detects failures and switching components that switch operations to a redundant component when a failure is detected, so that you could have the service still being available. So implementing extra component takes time and increases the cost of system development. It adds complexity to the system and therefore increases the chance of introducing bugs and vulnerability in the system as well. So those are the trade-offs you have to look at when trying to avoid one pit hole, whereas you may just get into another one. So what are the questions you need to ask when you want to design an architectural framework for your product? Now, how should the system be organized as a set of architectural components, where each of these components provides a subset of the overall system functionalities or functionality? The organization should deliver the system security, reliability, and performance that you need. How should these architectural components be distributed, and how should they communicate with each other? What technology should you use in building the system, and what components should be reused? And you remember that once you want to reuse some components, your architectural design is a bit limited in its use. So, having understood that the questions you ask yourself in architectural design is about set of components and how they interact. So we want to look at how should those components be organized. So abstraction in software design means that you focus on the essential elements of a system or software component without concern for its details. At the architectural level, your concern should be on large-scale architectural components. Of course, the composition involves analyzing these large-scale components and representing them as a set of fine-grained components. Layered models are often used to illustrate how a system is composed of components, as shown in this figure. We have an architectural model for a document retrieval system. So it's broken down into different components that perform specific functions. The first one is a web browser component. If you want to access using a web browser. You have the user interface management components. Then you have the information retrieval components. You have the document index components, which has to do with the arrangement of the data in the DB. Now you have the basic services and the databases. The next thing is architectural complexity. Now, complexity in a system architecture arises because of the numbers of the number and the number of relationship between components in that system. When decomposing a system into components, you should try to avoid unnecessary software complexity. So how the components relate is of utmost importance in order to reduce complexity, especially when you are looking at decomposing components into bits. So the first one is a localized relationship. Now, if there are relationship between a component A and a component B, now these are easier to understand if A and B are defined in the same module. Now, reduced shared dependency, where components A and B depends on some other components or data, complexity increases because changes to the shared components means you have to understand how these changes affect both A's and B's, right? So it is always preferable to use local data wherever possible and to avoid sharing data if you can. But can this be applicable in the real world? I don't think so. So these are the relationships that may exist. You have C1 is part of C2. Then, of course, you have a function or call that C1 calls C2. Then C1 is located with, that's co-location with C2. Then C1 shares data with C2. So example of component relationship. So you could have is parts, uses, is located with, or shares data with. That's kind of relationship that may exist. Somebody is at a construction site and is still in class. Really? Well done, sir. I can see you in your site. The guy has disappeared. So how would you gain if you're in a site like that? Yeah, so this is an example of a picture archiving and communication system, an architectural design I came up with. So this is what is called the conceptual framework, right? You put, these are the components on the, this is my left. Can you see my cursor? My left, you have all these being just components who, from here, we could get medical images to populate our database. Then, of course, we make them to pass through the HL7 protocol, right? Then, of course, we carry out anonymization of image data so that they can be, you could hide sensitive data of participants in the research. Then, of course, you carry out feature extractions if you wish. You index the image in the database. Then you could have search, printouts, and also display units for hospital examination or for teaching doctors or young doctors in the hospital. So it depends on what you seek to achieve. So the architectural design guideline are as follows: separation of concern, stable interfaces, and implement one. So organize your architecture into components. Even at doing that, you should also avoid relationship that could lead to slowness in data or in the overall product deployment. So I think our time is running out. Yes, can we have some extra minutes? Okay. Hello, can you see me? Can we have some extra minutes so that we can finish this and know that we just go to the next phase when we come next time? Or do I just give you to read up? Do we have any suggestions? You could raise up your hand so you could have the floor. What suggestion? Should we finish this class? We're not going to take up to 30 more minutes. Okay, I think there's some response. Okay, Mr. Uluwagbemisola Arugundade. We can have some minutes. Okay, thank you. You can continue. Mr. Absalam Shola. All right, thank you for your thoughts. Yeah, I hope this goes down well with others. So, but if you have it doesn't go well with you, why? Your phone is going to shut down or you have other classes after now? I have another engagement by 5 p.m. Oh, okay. You have a marriage. Please, let's complete it. Can we start writing names now? Now, this iPhone, I'm going to eject you out because I told you that you should name and you should put your name. So let me go to this thing and kick you out. So you should put your name, not iPhone. I don't know what iPhone is. If you just be able to follow simple instructions. I feel that's what is this one right now? I need to be in another meeting. Okay, Mr. Let me see. We have a session with our supervisor, sir. Oh, okay. Can you get told you guys to start writing your matric number for goodness sake? Can we get okay? Probably those of you who are going to be out, you could look up on the what's the name? On the YouTube channel and listen up to the stuff. Yeah, who told you guys to start writing your names and matric number? It's strange. Okay. Oh, really? I didn't say that. I said I was going to kick out somebody. Okay, you can continue if you have been fatalistic about it. Oh, okay. Then continue. So while we continue, so design guidelines and layered architecture. Each layer is an area of concern and is considered separately from other layers. The top layer is concerned with user interaction. The next layer down with user interface management. The third layer with information retrieval and so on. Now, within each layer, the components are independent and do not overlap in functionality. The lower layers include components that provide general functionalities so there is no need to replicate this in the components in a layer in a higher level. The architectural model is a higher level model that does not include implementation information. Ideally, components at level X, say, should only interact with the APIs of the components in level XI, that's X minus 1. That is, interaction should be between layer and not cross layer. Now, for those of you who have done data communication, oh, great. 4G has finally returned, though. That's good. I think somebody has worked on my stuff, so they have restored my 4G. Thank you. Yeah, so if you have done data communication and networking, you understand that in the TCP/IP protocol, that's a layered configuration. You should only have communication between the preceding layers. So if information is going to pass from the first layer to the last layer before crossing to another through the network, to the physical layer of another system, it cannot do cross-layer communication. It could only do layer by layer kind of communication, right? So what are the cross-cutting concerns once you want to develop architecture, software architectures? So the cross-cutting concerns, of course, there are many that are systemic. That means they affect the whole system itself. Now, it is in a layered architecture, cross-cutting concerns affect all layers in the system as well as the way in which people use the system. So cross-cutting concerns are completely different from functional concern. So I could ask you to differentiate between cross-cutting concern and functional concern, represented by layers in a software architecture. So every layer has to take them into account. And there are inevitable interaction between the layers because of the concerns. The existence of cross-cutting concern is the reason why modifying a system after it has been designed to improve its security is often difficult, right? So what are these cross-cutting concerns? The first one is security, the next one is performance, and the next one is reliability. So let's look at each of these and how it affects the system or the architectural design we intend to use. So security as a cross-cutting concern. Security architecture. So different technologies are used in different layers, such as an SQL database or a Firefox browser, right? Attackers can try to use the use of vulnerabilities in these technologies to gain access to at least one of the layers. Consequently, you need protection from attackers or from attacks at each layer, as well as protection at lower layers in the system from successful attacks that have occurred at higher level layers. So you can't just say, okay, let me protect my database without protecting other things that access your database. That may be a kind of folly. It's just like, okay, you have locked the door of your room while leaving your gate and that of your living room open. So it will just be easy for the criminals to get into your gate, get into your door, and with a strike of a bullet, your door is opened. So even though it's bulletproof, it will just take them a few minutes to put smoke in your house before you jump out to come and face the music. So security is a cross-cutting concern for all layers that you want to create. So it is important that you secure each of these layers. Now, if there is only a single security component in a system, this represents a critical system vulnerability. If our security checking goes through that component and it stops working properly or is compromised in an attack, then you have no reliable security in your system. By distributing security across the layer, your system is more resilient to attack and software failure. So a generic layer architecture for a web-based architecture application. So this is what you have. And of course, security should pass through all of this. So layer functionality in a web-based application. So browser-based or mobile user interface. So a web browser should a system interface in which HTML forms are often used to collect user input. JavaScript component for local actions such as input validation should also be included at this level. Alternatively, a mobile interface may be implemented as an app. Authentication and UI management, a user interface management layer that may include components for user authentication and web page generation. Application-specific functionality, an application layer that provides functionality of the application. Sometimes this may be expanded into more than one layer. basic shared services. A shared service layer, which includes components that provide services used by the application layer component, a database and transaction management, a database layer that provides services such as transaction management and recovery. If the application does not use a database, then this may not be required. So in all this, security concern should be implemented in all of these layers. Now, we looked at the island architectural design principle, replaceability, extensibility, age appropriate, programmability, and minimal work. Of course, when we're reading through the island, we saw some of these and the requests of the user, right? That he wants the system not just to be about managing the course, but about the student's learning outcome. So the island design principle. So the goal in designing the island system was to create an adaptable, universal system that could be easily updated as new learning tools become available. This means that it must be possible to change and replace components and services in the system. We take care of principle 1 and 2. Now, because of the potential system usage span on an age range from 3 to 18, we need to provide age-appropriate users interface and to make it easy to choose an interface. That's in principle 3. So principle 4 also contributes to the system adaptability and principle. Was included to ensure that this adaptability did not adversely affect user who did not require it. So designing Island as a service-oriented system. This principle led us to an architectural design decision that the airline system should be service-oriented. So having evaluated all concerns, then you can now zero in to the kind of architectural design that may be suitable for the products that you want to produce or the product you want to send to the user. So every component in the system is a service, right? Any service is potentially replaceable and new services can be created by combining existing services. Now, different services delivering comparable functionalities can be provided for students of different ages. So service integration. So when you design a service-oriented architecture, there's a need for you to integrate services that are available on this kind of architecture. So what are the types of services that we have? We have full integration, partial integration, and independent, because there's no need for integration because it's independent. So for full service integration, service are aware of and can communicate with other services through their APIs. Partial integration may share services or service components and database, but are not aware of and cannot communicate directly with other application services. Independent. These services do not use any shared system service or database, and they are unaware of any other services in the system. They can be replaced by any other comparable service. So this is the layered application model for the island system that has been described in previous chapters and also in this one. Another form of architecture is a distributed form or distributed architecture. So the distribution architecture of a software system defines the server in the system and the allocation of components to this server. So you could have client server architectures, are a type of distribution architecture that is suited to applications where client access a shared database and business logic operation on that data. In this architecture, the user interface is implemented on the user's own computer or mobile device. Functionality is distributed between the client and one or more server computers. So this is a client server architecture where you have different clients sending requests, getting response, sending requests. Then you have a load balancer so that you don't that one client doesn't continually get response at the detriment of others. Then you have the servers here. So the model view controller pattern. So you have the clients, then you have the server. You have browser, controller, view, then you have view request, change notification, view, fresh requests, and it goes on. The interaction goes on like that for that kind of orientation, right? So client server communication. Client server communication normally uses the HTTP protocol. The client sends a message to the server that includes an instruction set that includes an instruction such as get or post, along with the identifier of a resource, usually a URL, on which the instruction should operate. The message may also include additional information, such as information collected from a form. Now, I think if some of you have done something on data communication, you would have appreciated this more. So if there's a course called data communication, I recommend that you go for that course. So HTTP is a text-only protocol. So structured data has to be represented as text. There are two ways of representing this data that are widely used, namely XML and JSON. XML is a markup language with tags used to identify each data item. JSON is a simpler representation based on the representation of objects in the JavaScript language. So this is a multi-tier client-server architecture where you have clients using a web server, communicating with an application server and database server. Service-oriented architecture. Services in a service-oriented architecture are stateless components, which means that they can be replicated and can migrate from one computer to another. Many servers may be involved in providing services. The service-oriented architecture is usually easier to scale as demand increases and is quite resilient to failure. So this is a service-oriented architecture. You have different services from S1 to S6. You have a service gateway. Then you have clients accessing the service gateway through the web server, and the communication is bidirectional. So what are the issues in architectural choice? As I've explained earlier, data types and data updates is quite important. So if you are mostly using structured data that may be updated by different system features, it is usually best to have a single shared database that provides locking and transaction management as concurrency management. Think it as in database management. If data is distributed across services, you need a way. Hello? Yeah, can you hear me? I think I've been shut out again. Hello? Oh, you can still hear me. All right, thank you. All right, so let me continue. So I said issues, all right, thank you. Issues in architectural choice. So the data type is of importance. So if data is distributed across services, you need a way to keep it consistent, and this adds overhead to the system. change frequency. So if you anticipate that system components will be regularly changed or replaced, then isolating these components as separate service simplifies these changes. So it doesn't interrupt the operation of the whole system, or it doesn't slow down the system once you are carrying out these changes. So system execution platform. If you plan to run your system on the cloud with users accessing it over the internet, it's usually best to implement it as a service-oriented architecture, because scaling the system is simpler in that manner. If your product is a business system that runs on local server, a multi-tier architecture may be more appropriate. So what are the technology choices that you have to look at in deciding on what kind of architecture are you to that you want to deploy? So the first one is what kind of database, what kind of platform, what kind of server, open source development tools. So those are some of the technology choices. So for database, should you use a relational SQL database or an unstructured SQL database? Platform, should you deliver your product on a mobile app, or will you be able to access it on a web platform? Server, should you use dedicated in-house server or design your system to run on public cloud? If a public cloud should, if a public cloud, so which one should you use? You make choices in the Amazon, Google, Microsoft, or some other options that may be available to you. Open source, are there suitable open source components that you could incorporate into your product? Now, of course, we have argued that this, in a way, limits your freedom in designing your own architecture, right? Because open source will limit the way you could tamper with the way those open source software operate. Development tools. Do your development tools embed architectural assumptions about the software being developed that limit your architectural choices? Now, it depends on the tools you want to deploy. Then, of course, on databases. Now, there are two kinds of databases that are now commonly used. The relational database, where the data is organized into structured table. The unstructured database, in which the data are more flexible, user defined organization. No. All right, let me continue. So as I was saying, there are two kinds of databases. We have the relational and the non-structured ones. So relational databases such as MySQL are particularly suitable for situations where you need transaction management and the data structures are predictable and fairly simple. So the unstructured databases such as the MongoDBs are more flexible and potentially more efficient than relational databases for data analysis. Okay, you can see a number of you have jumped out of the class. So also you have to make choices on the delivery, how you want to, the platform you want to use to deliver your service. You want to deliver via a web-based delivery or a mobile product, or both. So what are the issues you need to consider for mobile delivery? You have to look at internet connectivity. You should look at the processor power of the mobile device. You should also look at the power management of the mobile device. Then you should consider the on-screen keyboard, how efficient and effective that is. So to deal with these differences, you usually need separate browser-based and mobile version of your product front end. you may need a completely different decomposition architecture in these different versions to ensure that performance and other characteristics are maintained. So, what consideration are you to look at in your server usage? So a key decision that you have to make is whether to design your system to run on customer server or to run on the cloud. Of course, we have seen the kind of or the how to configure some of the configuration of the servers that we have. So for customer products that are not simply mobile app, it is important that it almost always makes sense to develop from the cloud. For business products, it is more difficult decision to take. Now, some businesses are concerned about cloud security and prefer to run their system on in-house servers so that at least the exposure to attack is quite minimal for them. So they may have a predictable pattern of system usage, so there is less need to design your system to cope with large changes in demand. An important choice you have to make if you are running your software on the cloud is in which cloud provider you want to use. As we saw, I think about 3 or some examples, the Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and etc. So, decision on open source. Now, open source software is software that is available freely, of course, which you can change and modify to suit your purpose and as you wish. The advantage is that you can reuse rather than implement new softwares, which reduces development costs and time to market, especially when you are time bound. The disadvantage of using open source software is that you are constrained by that software and have no control over its evolution. Now, the decision on the use of open source software also depends on the availability, maturity, and continuing support of open source components. So open source license issues may impose constraints on how you use the software also. Now, your choice of open source software should depend on the type of products that you are developing, your target audience or markets, and the expertise of your development team. Constraints or that's things you need to consider on your development tools. Of course, technologies are being churned out every day like that. So development technologies such as mobile development toolkits or web application framework influence the architecture of your software. These technologies have built-in assumptions about system architecture, and you have to conform to this assumption to use the development system. So this also affects your choice of your architectural framework. So the development technology that you use may also have an indirect influence on the system architecture. So developers usually favor architectural choices that use familiar technologies that they understand instead of having to explore new ones that will take a number of your time. So for example, if your team have a lot of experience on relational database, they may argue for this instead of the non-structural database. So in conclusion, software architecture is the fundamental organization of a system embodied in its components, their relationship to each other and to the environment, and the principle guiding its design and evolution. The architecture of the software system has a significant influence on non-functional system properties such as reliability, efficiency, and security, right? So architectural design involves understanding the issues that are critical for your product and creating system description that shows components and their relationship. The principal rule of architectural description is to provide a basis for the development team to discuss the system organization. Informal architectural diagrams are effective in architectural description because they are fast and easy to draw and share. System decomposition involves analyzing architectural components and representing them as a set of final grain components. So to minimize complexity, you should separate concerns, avoid functional duplication, and focus on component interfaces. Web-based systems often have a common layer structure, including user interface layer, application-specific layer, and database layer. The distribution architecture is a system defines the organization of the server in that systems and the allocation of components to this server. Multi-tier client server and service-oriented architecture are the most commonly used architecture for web-based systems. So making decisions on technology such as database and cloud technologies are an important part of the architectural design process. So we have seen some of the things we need to consider in our choice of architectural design principles. What we need to put together, what questions we need to ask, and a host of other things that may be needed in our design of architectural framework. So thank you for listening, and I hope we have some questions. So if you have questions, please, let's have your hands raised. Questions? Okay, Mr. Olusegun Adewale, you have the floor. You could unmute yourself. You can unmute yourself, Mr. Olusegun.
Okay, sir. Hello, sir.
Yes, please.
Yeah, good evening, sir.
Yes.
Thank you for the lecture delivery. I just want to confirm, although we are not so sure about the test coming up next week, according to what you said earlier, but is it going to be physical or online as well, so that we can plan ourselves ahead for the test? Thank you.
I seem not to understand your position. Can you clarify a bit?
You said based on orientation coming up next week that we might not have lectures. And if you decide that we are going to have lectures next week, it might be for tests. You said it earlier that probably we are going to write tests next week. Then my submission now is that I'm just asking that, is it going to be online? Is it going to be online or is it going to be in class test?